How Countries Go Broke. The Big Cycle by Ray Dalio is not just a book about economics. It is a clear warning disguised as a history lesson. It is the kind of book that makes you pause, look around at the world, and realize that we are all riding a massive wave, one that has lifted up the greatest nations in history and then slammed them into the rocks of collapse. Dalio's central idea is as captivating as it is unsettling. Countries go broke in cycles, and those cycles are predictable. And right now, according to Dalio, we're heading into the most dangerous part of that cycle. This is not theory. It's history repeating itself. Dalio begins the book by taking readers back in time, not to one country or one moment, but to a sweeping view of how empires rise and fall. From the Dutch Empire to the British Empire and now to the United States, Dalio uncovers patterns that are eerily similar. Each empire begins with strength, intelligence, hard work, and innovation. They grow by building strong education systems, investing in infrastructure, becoming productive, and establishing a stable currency. They earn trust, they build military power, and then they dominate global trade. But slowly, and almost invisibly, cracks begin to show. Debt builds. The gap between rich and poor widens. The ruling class grows complacent. The people get divided. The government prints more money. Inflation rises, and then everything that was built begins to unravel. Explains that every country follows what he calls the big cycle, which moves through 6 key phases. The first is the rise driven by education, strong leadership, productivity, and innovation. The second is the top, where the country enjoys global dominance, high incomes, and a respected currency. The third phase introduces debt-fueled growth. Governments and businesses borrow to spend more. It feels like prosperity, but it is built on unstable ground. The fourth is the bubble. This is where things seem better than ever, but under the surface the debt is unsustainable, and the cracks are widening. The fifth phase is the downturn, which is usually triggered by a financial crisis, political unrest, or military conflict. And finally, the sixth is restructuring, or collapse. Sometimes countries bounce back. Often they don't. What makes this book chilling is that Dalio connects all of this to what is happening today. The United States has followed every step of the big cycle. It rose to power after World War II. Dominated the global economy, became the world's reserve currency, and created unprecedented wealth. But that wealth has become uneven. The middle class is shrinking. Debt is at historic highs. The government continues to print money to cover obligations. Inflation is rising. Social unrest is growing. Political divisions are deepening. And trust in institutions is eroding. According to Dalio, the U.S. is now deep in Phase 5. And Phase 6 is on the horizon. Dalio uses charts, timelines, and historical parallels to make this case. He points out how similar our current moment is to the 1930s. Back then, debt levels were high, the economy was fragile, social conflict was growing, and nationalism was on the rise. The result was a global depression and a world war. Today, while the causes are not identical, the conditions are alarmingly close. Dalio urges readers to pay attention not to the headlines but to the forces underneath them. When trust is lost in money, in government, and in leadership, the fabric of society begins to unravel. One of the most powerful chapters in the book deals with the loss of reserve currency status. Dalio explains that being the global reserve currency gives a country enormous power. It allows the country to borrow cheaply, control global trade, and influence geopolitics. But no reserve currency lasts forever. The Dutch lost it. The British lost it. And Dalio believes the US is at risk of losing it too. If that happens, it could lead to a dramatic decline in living standards, a collapsing dollar, rising interest rates, and a loss of geopolitical power. It would not be a slow drift. It would be a sudden and brutal adjustment. But Dalio is not only interested in nations. He is also speaking to individuals. Throughout the book, he offers strategies for how people can prepare for the final stages of the big cycle. He urges readers to diversify their assets, invest in hard money like gold, and look at emerging markets, especially China, which he believes is on the rise. Dalio is careful to say he is not rooting for any country to fail, but he is driven by data and history, and the data is painting a dark picture. For those who are unprepared, the book also explores how leadership matters. Dalio notes that strong leadership can delay the collapse, and weak leadership can accelerate it. When countries face crisis, they either pull together or fall apart. They either reform or break down. Leadership that is unifying, honest, and focused on long-term prosperity can create a soft landing. Leadership that is corrupt, divided, or reactive will only speed the fall. Dalio warns that many current leaders across the world are choosing short-term political wins over long-term national health, and that is a recipe for disaster. Dalio's writing is urgent, yet accessible. He avoids jargon and breaks down complex economic principles into stories and analogies that stick with you. He tells the story of the Dutch East India Company and how their greed and overextension mirrored what we see in corporate America today. He looks at the fall of the British Empire and how losing reserve currency status triggered a deep recession and global power shift. These aren't just stories from the past. They are maps of our future. He also dives deep into debt cycles. He explains how short-term debt cycles happen every 5 to 10 years, like the 2008 financial crisis, but long-term debt cycles take 75 to 100 years and end with currency devaluation, social unrest, or war. The U.S. is at the tail end of a long-term debt cycle, and according to Dalio, this is the most dangerous phase of all. In this stage, governments borrow heavily to maintain appearances, but eventually creditors lose faith and inflation spikes. People flee the currency. Trust disappears. Collapse follows. Despite all this, Dalio doesn't want readers to panic. He wants them to prepare. He believes that those who understand the cycle can take steps to protect themselves, their families, and their communities. He advises being smart about where you live, what you invest in, and how you educate yourself. He believes that resilience comes from knowledge, and that history is our greatest guide. Toward the end of the book, Dalio talks about China not as a threat but as an example of a country on the rise. He notes their rapid economic growth, massive infrastructure investment, and strategic global positioning. He doesn't claim China is perfect, but he argues they are following the early phases of the big cycle. They are rising as the West declines. He urges readers not to think in terms of nationalism, but in terms of trends. If you want to survive the future, you have to read the signs. And the signs are everywhere. Dalio ends the book with a challenge. He asks whether we will repeat the mistakes of the past or learn from them, whether we will confront our problems honestly or hide from them, whether we will choose long-term wisdom or short-term comfort. He doesn't claim to have all the answers, but he is clear about the stakes. History has already shown us what happens when countries ignore the big cycle. The only question is whether we are listening. How countries go broke. The big cycle is not just a book. It's a wake-up call, a blueprint for survival, a handbook for understanding how the world really works when you strip away the noise. If you want to be ready for what's coming, if you want to protect what matters most, this is the audio you need to hear. Ray Dalio has seen the cycle from every angle, and in this book he hands us the truth. The rest is up to us. Link in description.